Standing again is not born in triumph. It begins in the dust where you once fell. The ground beneath you still remembers the weight of your body. It holds the outline of where you collapsed, the impression of your defeat pressed into its silence. Falling feels permanent. It convinces you that nothing will shift, that breath will never steady, that strength will never return. In that moment, the world narrows to the floor beneath your face, to the ache in your bones, to the sound of your own pulse pounding against despair. And yet, here lies the secret no one speaks of. Falling is not foreign. It is not proof that you are broken beyond repair. It is proof that you lived boldly enough to risk, to step forward, to stretch beyond safety. Everyone falls. The warrior, the dreamer, the lover, the seeker, all are humbled by collapse. To fall is to be human, to stretch into life so fully that gravity finally claims you for a moment. Falling is not the ending of your story. It is a chapter written in the ink of struggle. But when you lie there, pressed against the cold ground, it feels like finality. The silence grows thick, wrapping around you like chains. The world continues above, yet you remain still. Doubt whispers that you will never rise. Shame presses on your chest, heavy and unforgiving. The ground begins to feel like home, not by choice, but by exhaustion. You wonder if this is where your story will end, if the fall has become the full definition of your being. The illusion of finality is powerful. It tells you that nothing waits beyond this place. It tricks you into believing the dust will claim you forever. But illusions, no matter how loud, are not truth. The ground may hold you, but it cannot own you. Silence may surround you, but it cannot silence what is unbroken within. Even here, in the shadow of collapse, something stirs. Something small, quiet, but alive. Courage does not enter like thunder. It does not arrive like a trumpet call. It comes like a whisper, so faint you might mistake it for imagination. It says, "Not yet." It says, "Breathe again." It says, "Stand, even if you shake." Courage begins not with strength, but with the decision to listen to that whisper. It is the ember hidden in ashes, the single spark refusing to die in the dark. You may not notice it at first, but it waits, steady, patient, unyielding. This whisper of courage is what shifts the weight. It does not erase the pain, but it tells you the pain is not your ending. It does not deny the fall, but it tells you the fall is not the last word. It reminds you that the act of rising is not sudden, but gradual. First, a thought, then a breath, then a hand pressing against the ground. Every movement small, fragile, trembling, yet every movement filled with defiance, every motion an announcement. I am not finished. Picture ashes after fire, cold, gray, lifeless. And yet beneath them a single ember glows, hidden, quiet, waiting. That ember is courage. It does not roar, but it burns. It does not blind, but it guides. It asks only this: protect me, feed me, trust me. And when you do, when you guard that ember against despair, it grows, it becomes flame, then blaze, then light enough to guide you out of shadow. Tears fall as you lie there, pressed to the earth. They soak the dust, they sting your eyes, they blur your vision. Yet even tears are not wasted. They are the rain that softens the soil, preparing it for growth. Each tear is a seed watered. Each sob a release of what no longer serves you. And from that softened ground, courage rises, fragile at first, then stronger. Tears do not mark weakness. They mark the beginning of becoming. And so you begin to hear it more clearly, the whisper of courage threading through your breath. It reminds you that the ground is not a grave. It is a place of pause. It reminds you that silence is not death. It is a canvas waiting for sound. It reminds you that though you have fallen, your story has not collapsed with you. The story is waiting for the next line, and that line begins when you gather yourself to stand again. You are not the fall. You are not the silence. You are not the dust pressed against your skin. You are the will that refuses to remain there. You are the voice that whispers louder each time you listen. You are the ember that chooses to burn even when the world tried to smother you. That is courage, not the absence of fear, but the decision to rise despite it. And in this moment, as you lie in the dust and feel the weight of what has broken you, you realize the story is not finished. The ground beneath you may remember your fall, but it will also remember your rising. The silence around you may echo with despair, but it will also echo with the sound of your breath steadying, your body lifting, your spirit daring. The dust may cling to your skin, but you will brush it off, and in that gesture lies proof. You have chosen to stand again. This is where the journey begins, not in triumph, but in trembling, not in certainty, but in defiance. The courage to stand again does not arrive after the pain has ended. It arrives within it, glowing like a quiet flame. And as you lean into that whisper, as you prepare to shift from stillness to movement, the story unfolds into its next chapter. And in that silence, where everything seemed finished, the story of standing again quietly began. Yet before the rise could take shape, the memory of the fall still thundered within you. The shock lingers, sharp as a sudden wound. Falling is never graceful. It snatches breath, it bruises bone, it rattles spirit. One moment you are upright, holding dreams in your hands, and the next you are scattered, clutching at nothing but air. The descent is quicker than comprehension, and the landing steals sound from your chest. The mind replays it endlessly, the stumble, the slip, the blow that left you undone. Shock is cruel in its repetition, forcing you to relive the moment until it burns itself into memory. You cannot escape the images, the betrayal that cut you down, the failure that toppled your plans, the grief that bent your knees. Each replay stings anew, as though the fall happens again and again, even when the world has already moved forward. And shock does more than wound the body, it unsettles the spirit. The fall questions everything you believed about yourself. You once thought you were steady, untouchable, immune to collapse, but the ground reminds you otherwise. It shows no mercy, only truth, that even the strongest can shatter, that even the surest can stumble. The shock humbles you. It strips illusions away until only raw humanity remains. Lying there, the world feels unreal. Colors dim, sounds distort, time bends. What once seemed solid now appears fragile. The very ground you trusted betrays you with its coldness. The air, once easy to breathe, turns heavy. Your own hands, once symbols of ability, tremble as though foreign. This disorientation is not weakness. It is the body and soul grappling with rupture. Shock is the echo of impact, and it reverberates long after the fall. In these moments, courage feels distant. You are not yet thinking of standing. You are simply surviving the tremor. And survival in itself is a quiet act of courage. To remain breathing when everything screams of ending, that is defiance. To let the heart beat through the storm of disbelief, that is strength disguised as fragility. The shock does not announce courage, but courage is hidden in every second you endure it. Yet the shock also carries danger. It tempts you to freeze, to remain where you landed, to surrender to the lie that rising is impossible. Fear disguises itself as safety. Stay down, stay still. At least here you cannot fall again. And so you linger, paralyzed not by the fall itself, but by the terror of repeating it. This is the trap of shock, convincing you that stillness is survival, when in truth it becomes a slow surrender. But even here, in paralysis, the whisper continues, faint but present. It threads through the chaos, reminding you that the ground is not the end. You may not yet feel strength in your limbs, but the seed of rising is already planted. The shock does not erase it. If anything, the shock prepares the soil, breaking open what was hard, making space for what will grow. Consider the earth after lightning, scorched, cracked, broken. Yet within that wound, new life often begins. The soil, once hard, becomes fertile. Seeds long dormant awaken in the rupture. In the same way, your fall cracked open what was hidden. The shock exposed the layers of you that safety never touched. Painful, yes, but also revealing. Within the break lies the beginning of remaking. The shock will not vanish quickly. It will linger in your chest, in your breath, in your nights. But lingering does not mean ruling. You may carry its tremor, but it does not dictate your future. Slowly, as you breathe into the aftermath, clarity will seep through. The shock softens, the edges dull, the memory loses its sharpness. What once consumed you becomes a scar instead of an open wound. And scars, though reminders of impact, no longer bleed. You begin to realize that the shock was not proof of your weakness, but proof that you dared. Only those who walk, who reach, who risk can fall. The ones who never move, never stumble, but they never grow either. The shock is a painful teacher, yet its lesson is fierce. Life is fragile, but so are chains. In breaking, you are free to rebuild differently. This realization does not erase the ache. You may still flinch at the memory, still wince at the scar. But courage does not require erasure. It requires acknowledgement. The shock happened, the fall was real, and yet, here you are, breathing, remembering, enduring. That endurance is the first evidence that the story has not ended. The shock, then, becomes paradoxical. It is both the enemy and the messenger. It wounds, but it also awakens. It terrifies, but it also clarifies. It reminds you that you are not invincible, but also that you are not undone. In its harshness, it prepares you for the rise that will follow. For no one truly understands the strength of standing until they have felt the violence of falling. And so, as the shock slowly loosens its grip, as the tremor begins to fade, you find yourself at the edge of possibility. You are not yet standing, but you are no longer shattered. You are breathing into the silence, feeling the whisper grow louder, sensing that movement will return. The shock has humbled you, but it has not finished you. It has broken illusions, but it has not broken your essence. And from this humbling place, fragile but alive, the story leans forward. The courage to stand again does not leap. It begins with the faintest stir of will, and in that stir, in that quiet shift, the next chapter of rising begins to form. But before movement takes root, you must face what lies unseen. The fall is visible, the scars are visible, but the heaviest weight is not. It hides in silence, cloaked within the mind, pressing upon the spirit with an invisible force. This is the weight that lingers long after the ground releases you, the burden no one else can see. You may look steady to others, yet inside you carry chains of doubt, fear, and shame. Invisible weight speaks softly, but its whispers pierce deeply. It tells you that rising is pointless, that standing will only bring another fall. It convinces you that your story has already ended, that hope is nothing more than cruelty dressed as light. It hides behind familiar faces, anxiety, hesitation, exhaustion. And because no one else sees it, you often pretend it does not exist. But it exists. It shapes your breath, your posture, your choices. It is a prison without walls, and its bars are made of lies. The weight is not only internal, it comes also from voices carried within memory. Words once spoken by others echo in your mind. You are not enough. You will fail again. You do not belong. Even when those voices are long gone, their sound remains, weaving into thought, bending perception. The fall awakens these voices, and the invisible weight multiplies. To stand again, you must learn to separate their lies from your truth. Yet this burden, as crushing as it feels, is not invincible. Invisible does not mean infinite. Though unseen, it can be named, and naming is the beginning of release. When you admit, yes, I carry shame, yes, I carry fear, yes, I carry doubt, you strip the weight of its secrecy. You drag it into the open air where courage can confront it. What was once hidden begins to lose its power when spoken. Courage in this place is not loud. It does not roar against the weight. Instead, it breathes slowly, choosing not to collapse under the invisible load. Courage is a whisper saying, I see the chains, but I will not call them my skin. I feel the pressure, but I will not confuse it with truth. Every time you choose to acknowledge the weight and yet continue breathing, you practice defiance. You weaken its grip. Imagine carrying stones in your pocket. No one else notices, yet with every step the weight drags you lower. At first you believe the heaviness is natural, that perhaps everyone walks like this. But then you begin to empty the pockets, one stone at a time. A memory named, a lie challenged, a fear faced. With each stone dropped, the invisible weight grows lighter. You realize you were never weak. You were simply burdened. And burdens, unlike essence, can be released. The weight will try to convince you that it defines you. That because you feel fear, you are fear. That because you carry shame, you are shame. But you are not what you carry. You are the one who carries. And if you carry, you can also set down. This realization is the quiet dawn of courage to recognize that what presses you is not you. You remain separate, stronger, more enduring than the invisible weight would allow you to believe. And as you breathe through it, clarity emerges. You begin to see that courage is not about pretending the weight is gone. It is about choosing to move even while it presses. Courage is not denying heaviness, but refusing to surrender to it. Standing again does not require the absence of burden. It requires the decision to rise despite it. This truth does not arrive all at once. Some days the weight will seem unbearable, and you will remain still. But even stillness is not surrender if you continue to breathe, if you continue to believe that movement will return. Other days, you will rise a little, carrying the invisible weight upon trembling shoulders, yet rising nonetheless. Each time you move, you prove the weight wrong. Each time you stand, you strip it of its illusion. The invisible weight is heavy, but it is not eternal. With courage, you learn to walk with it, then to set it down, then to rise without it. You discover that what once seemed unbreakable begins to crack under the steady pressure of resilience. The chains lose their hold, the whispers lose their authority, and the lies lose their power. What remains is you lighter, clearer, stronger. And so the journey deepens. You are not free yet, but you are freer than before. The invisible weight no longer silences you completely. It no longer convinces you that standing is impossible. You hear the whisper of courage more clearly now, threading through your breath, anchoring you in the truth that you are not the burden you carry. You are the one who will stand again. From this place, trembling but awake, the story continues. The weight is real, but so is your will. And as the weight begins to loosen, the first movements toward rising emerge. What seemed invisible is now named, and what is named can be faced. The next step waits, fragile but certain, as the act of standing prepares to take its shape. And in that preparation lies the smallest yet most sacred moment, the first step upward. Rising does not arrive as a sudden leap into triumph. It begins with something fragile, almost unnoticeable, like a hand pressing against the earth for balance, like a breath drawn deeper than the last, like a single decision whispered into your own soul, not yet finished. That first step is rarely graceful. It shakes, it trembles, it bends under the memory of collapse. You feel the resistance of gravity not only in your muscles, but in your doubts. Every scar pulls against you. Every whisper of failure returns to haunt. Yet even in trembling, the act of moving is defiance. The ground that once held you begins to loosen its claim. The invisible weight that pressed upon your chest cannot stop the steady will that pushes through it. This step is sacred because it is so small. Many will overlook it. To the world, it seems insignificant, a body shifting slightly, a spirit stirring faintly. But to you, it is monumental. It is the threshold between despair and determination. It is the moment when stillness transforms into momentum. Courage is not found in the loud celebration of victory, but in this quiet insistence to begin again. The first step demands humility. It is not polished or perfect. It does not look like triumph. It looks like struggle. Your hands may still be dirty from the fall, your breath uneven, your vision blurred with tears. But humility is not weakness. It is the soil in which courage grows. To rise, you must first accept that you rise imperfectly, awkwardly, slowly, The beauty is not in the perfection of standing, but in the refusal to remain fallen. Consider the seed buried in darkness. Its first movement is not dramatic. It does not explode into bloom. It simply pushes a fragile shoot through soil, fragile enough to break at a touch, yet persistent enough to split stone. That is the power of the first step, delicate yet unyielding. You may not yet be strong, but you are moving, and movement is the beginning of freedom. The first step is also an act of memory. You recall the ground that caught you, but you also remember the strength that once carried you. That memory fuels you. You begin to realize that though the fall was real, so too was every victory before it. You are not only the collapse, you are also the survivor, the dreamer, the fighter. And when you remember that, you gather enough courage to push against the silence once more. Do not underestimate this step. The world celebrates the finish line, but it is this fragile beginning that is the true miracle. For without it, no rise can follow. Without it, no healing can unfold. Without it, the story remains paused forever at the point of collapse. Every triumph you will ever carry begins with this trembling motion, this hesitant push against despair. And yes, fear will follow you. The memory of the fall will echo with every inch you rise. The voice of doubt will argue, why stand when you may fall again? But courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to stand despite it. Fear accompanies every rise, but fear cannot own you when courage leads the way. With each tremor, you are proving that fear is not final. So you lift a little more. Your body, though unsteady, begins to obey your will. Your spirit, though scarred, begins to stretch toward light. You may stumble, but stumbling while rising is still rising. You may falter, but faltering forward is still movement. And every inch you gain is proof that you are not abandoned to despair. Every inch whispers louder, I am not finished. The first step up is quiet, but it is also eternal. It is etched into memory as the moment you refuse to surrender. Long after the victory is complete, long after the applause fades, this moment will remain sacred. For it is here, not at the summit, that your courage was most pure. It was here that you declared to the world and to yourself, even after 5, collapse, I will rise. And so, though the step is small, it carries the weight of transformation. It signals to the universe that you are not defeated. It calls forth strength you thought was gone. It opens a door that despair tried to seal. This step may tremble, but it is unbreakable in its meaning. It says you will not remain where you fell. It says you still believe in the possibility of becoming. And with that step, the story shifts once again. The ground that once seemed like a grave now becomes a platform. The silence that once mocked you now becomes the backdrop for your breath. The dust that once clung to your skin becomes the witness of your rising. All of it gathers, not as chains, but as proof that courage has begun to move. This is how standing begins, not in victory, but in trembling defiance, not in the absence of pain, but in the decision to rise within it. The first step up does not promise ease, but it promises motion, and motion is enough. Because from motion comes strength, from strength comes resilience, and from resilience comes the full act of standing. And as you feel your body shift upward, as you hear the whisper of courage grow louder, you realize that what once seemed impossible has already begun. You are not finished, you are rising, and the first step has already changed everything. For with that trembling movement comes the question of identity. The fall tried to rename you. It whispered labels across your skin: failure, weak, forgotten, broken. Those names clung to you like shadows, lingering even as you began to rise. Yet courage is not only about movement, it is about reclaiming who you are when the world has tried to tell you otherwise. Identity bends under the weight of collapse. You begin to believe that the fall defines you more than the journey ever did. You look at your scars and see only the proof of defeat, not the testimony of survival. You mistake the dust on your skin for the whole of your being. But identity is not given by the fall. It is not shaped by the voices that laughed when you stumbled, nor by the silence of those who turned away. Identity is the voice you claim when all other voices go quiet. To rise is to reclaim that voice. It is to stand in the echo of false names and say, I am more than what broke me. I am more than what left me. It is to strip away the masks others placed upon you and remember the truth buried beneath. Rising in identity means refusing to let your collapse be your final description. It means declaring, even in trembling, that your worth was never destroyed, only hidden. This reclamation is not instant. It comes in fragments, like pieces of a mirror reassembled. One memory at a time, one breath at a time, you begin to see yourself not as the fallen, but as the one who dared to rise. You recall the courage it took to risk in the first place. You remember the strength it took to breathe through the shock. Slowly, you piece together a vision of yourself that is not bound to collapse, but liberated by resilience. Identity reclaimed is identity transformed. You are not who you were before the fall. That version of you was untested, untouched by the gravity of pain. Now, you are deeper. Now, you are wiser. The fall stripped you bare, but in that stripping, it revealed your essence. You no longer rise to prove yourself to others. You rise to embody the truth you already carry. That truth is unshakable. You are not defined by what you lost, but by what you choose to become. Rising in identity is not about arrogance. It is about alignment. It is standing in the honest reflection of yourself, scars included. It is saying, yes, I was broken, but I am not only broken. Yes, I carry scars, but they are part of my beauty. Yes, I fell, but I also rose. This alignment frees you from the false names and binds you to the one name that matters, your own. Think of a tree after storm. Its branches may break, its leaves may scatter, but its roots remain, and from those roots, it grows again, perhaps differently shaped, but still alive, still itself. Rising in identity is the same. You may look changed after the storm, but your essence endures. You are still rooted. You are still whole. The storm did not erase you. It revealed the depth of your strength, and when you rise in identity, the world begins to shift. Those who doubted may still whisper, but their words no longer anchor you. Those who left may remain gone, but their absence no longer defines you. You are no longer shaped by their sight or silence. You are shaped by your own courage, by the name you have chosen to wear. And in that choice, you stand taller, clearer, stronger. This standing is not only for yourself. When you claim your identity after collapse, you light a path for others. They see in you the possibility that they, too, are more than their fall. They see in your scars the proof that survival is possible, and in your rising, they are reminded of their own hidden courage. Your identity becomes not just your strength, but a beacon for others. And so, as you rise, trembling still, you begin to feel the shift inside. You are no longer the one lying in dust. You are no longer only the one who fell. You are the one who stood again. You are the one who reclaimed what was nearly stolen. You are the one who wears scars as symbols, not shackles. This is your identity now, not bound to collapse, but born from courage. Rising in identity is the quiet triumph no one can take away. It is not applause that defines it. It is not recognition that seals it. It is the knowledge within that whispers louder than any doubt. I know who I am, and I will not be named by my fall. With that truth, you rise not just in body, but in spirit. And that rising cannot be undone. And from this place of reclaimed self, the story deepens again. The courage to stand is no longer only about motion. It has become about meaning. And with meaning, anchored in your identity, the path ahead begins to open, leading you towards strength that endures beyond scars. Because scars are not enemies. They are not stains to be hidden or erased. They are testimonies etched into skin and spirit, reminders of every battle survived, every wound endured, every collapse that did not finish you. The world may see scars as damage, but courage sees them as evidence, proof that you lived through what could have broken you, and proof that you chose to rise anyway. Scars whisper stories. Each mark holds a chapter, the betrayal that cut deep, the failure that wounded pride, the grief that hollowed the heart. But the story does not end in the cut, it ends in the healing. For a scar is not the wound itself, it is the line drawn across where the wound has closed. It says, "Here pain entered, and here I endured, and here I became more than what hurt me." Carrying scars requires courage, because the temptation is always to hide them. You fear others will see only weakness, only damage. You fear they will mistake the scar for the wound still open. But scars are not weakness. They are resilience made visible. To hide them is to deny the story of survival written into your being. To reveal them is to declare, "I am not ashamed of what I survived. I am shaped, but not defined, by my pain." Courage begins to transform the way you see your scars, no longer as shame, but as strength. No longer as evidence of fragility, but as symbols of endurance. The scar across your heart is not the end of love. It is the mark that says you dared to love even when loss was possible. The scar across your dreams is not the end of ambition. It is the reminder that you tried, that you risked, that you will risk again. Think of the landscape after fire: charred trees, blackened soil, a scar upon the earth. Yet from that soil, new shoots emerge, stronger than before. Life grows again, not in spite of the scar, but through it. The land remembers the fire, but it also remembers how to renew. You are the same. Your scars do not end your becoming. They enrich it. They add depth to your strength, texture to your story. Carrying scars is not easy. Some days they ache, old pain echoing as though it never left. Some days you trace them with your fingers and wonder if they make you less. But courage reminds you, scars do not make you less. They make you more layered, more real, more human. They reveal that you did not remain untested. You stepped into life fully, and life marked you as someone who endured. The courage to carry scars also means allowing them to be seen, not to seek pity, but to share truth. When others see your scars, they see not only your pain, but your persistence. They recognize their own battles reflected in yours. Your scars become a bridge, a quiet reminder to others that healing is possible, that survival is real, that standing again is not reserved for the untouched, but for the scarred. This carrying is an act of dignity. It is not about parading pain, but about refusing to erase what shaped you. It is walking forward without apology for what remains visible. It is saying, "This is my history, but it is also my strength. I am not defined by the wound, but I am deepened by the scar." And in this declaration, you rise freer, no longer chained to hiding what is true. Scars do not erase beauty, they redefine it. They remind you that beauty is not perfection, but perseverance. They remind you that strength is not the absence of pain, but the transformation of it. To carry scars with courage is to live in honesty, refusing the illusion of untouched perfection, choosing instead the authenticity of a life fully lived. And when you look at yourself, at your body, your spirit, your past, you begin to see the scars not as disfigurements, but as maps. Maps of where you have been, of what you have survived, of who you have become. They guide you forward, reminding you never to underestimate your own endurance. They tell you, you are still here, you are still standing, you are stronger than the fall, stronger than the wound, stronger even than the silence that tried to claim you. Carrying scars with courage transforms memory into testimony. The ache becomes wisdom, the mark becomes strength, the story becomes a beacon, and as you walk, you realize that the scars you once feared to show are now the very evidence that gives your journey meaning. They are not shackles, they are signatures of survival. And so, you carry them not with shame, but with reverence. You let them breathe in the open. You let them remind you of battles fought and won. You let them declare to the world, "I endured, I healed, I rose," and as you carry them, you feel lighter, not heavier. For the courage to carry scars is not about holding pain forever, but about recognizing that healing has already happened. From this place of reverence, the story moves forward. You are not only rising in identity, You are walking with the proof of survival carved into your being. And with each scar carried with dignity, you step closer into the fullness of your strength, ready to embody the courage that not only heals but inspires. For rising is never just about you. Each time you stand again, your act becomes a quiet signal to those still on the ground. Your survival whispers into their silence, "If it was possible for me, it is possible for you too." This is the hidden power of courage. It multiplies. It begins in one heart but echoes in many. When you stand, others notice. Even if they say nothing, they watch how you lift yourself from dust, how you carry scars without shame, how you walk despite trembling. They see in you a reflection of their own secret hope, because somewhere in their story, they have fallen too. Somewhere in their nights, they have wondered if standing is even possible. And when they see you rise, their doubt cracks, their fear loosens, and courage stirs in them as well. Standing again becomes more than survival, it becomes service. Without preaching, without demanding, you offer proof. Proof that collapse is not conclusion, proof that wounds can close, proof that despair is not permanent. This proof is not given in words alone, it is given in presence, in the way you walk, in the way your scars shine without apology. You become a living story, and that story feeds the starving courage in others. Think of a single flame in darkness. Alone, it flickers, fragile, vulnerable to wind. But as it burns, it offers light for others to ignite. Soon one flame becomes many, and the darkness begins to break. That is what happens when you stand. Your rising is a spark, and sparks do not remain alone. They awaken fire in the places where others believed only cold existed. Yet standing for others does not mean carrying their weight. It does not mean rising perfectly so no one sees you falter. To stand for others is to stand authentically, to show that rising is not flawless, but real. To reveal that trembling legs can still hold you, that scars can still shine, that brokenness can still become light. Perfection does not inspire, honesty does. And when you stand honestly, others see themselves in you, not an untouchable image, but a reachable truth. There will be those who need your courage even more than they will admit. They may never say your standing saved them, but silently it will. A stranger may glance at you and find strength to face their own fall. A friend may recall your scars and finally believe they can heal their own. Even those you never meet may carry your courage like a secret lantern, guiding them through their own night. This ripple cannot be measured, but it is real. For courage is contagious. It spreads without effort, without noise. What began as your private act of defiance becomes a communal act of hope. The world shifts slightly each time you refuse to remain in the dust. The atmosphere around you lightens, not because the pain has disappeared, but because courage has entered. And here lies a deeper truth. Standing again is not only for yourself, and it is not only for others. It is for the story itself. Life writes through you, and your rising becomes a line in a larger poem, a verse in a greater song. Your courage adds to the chorus of humanity's resilience, a chorus that says, "We fall, but we rise. We break, but we mend. We grieve, but we grow." Your courage may never be shouted from stages or written into history books, but it will live in quieter places, in the heart of someone who decided not to give up, in the eyes of someone who dared to try again, in the silence of someone who chose to breathe through despair. That is legacy, not fame, but influence that endures unseen. And so, standing for others becomes as natural as breathing. You do not rise with an agenda. You rise because courage calls you. But in rising, you offer more than survival. You offer hope wrapped in your very existence. You become a mirror, showing others the reflection of strength they forgot they carried. You become a map, pointing the way toward possibility. You become a reminder that even in dust, life waits to be lifted. The courage to stand again is never wasted. Even if you feel unseen, even if no one thanks you, even if your scars remain private, your rising still matters. It matters because courage shifts the air around it. It matters because every act of standing adds weight to the truth that despair never has the final word. And even if you do not hear the echoes, your courage continues to resound. This is why you stand not only for yourself, you stand for the ones who cannot yet. You stand for the ones who doubt. You stand for the ones who have forgotten the sound of their own strength. You stand because every act of courage plants seeds you may never see grow. But they will grow, and when they do, others will rise too. And from this place, where standing transforms from private survival to shared inspiration, the story continues. The courage you carry is no longer only yours, it belongs to every heart your rising touches. And with each step forward, the path widens, preparing the way for even greater transformation ahead. For standing again is not simply returning to where you were. It is not rewinding the story to recover what was lost. It is entering a deeper dimension of living, one that only those who have fallen and risen can understand. The depth of standing is not about regaining what slipped through your fingers. It is about discovering what could never be touched until you stood again. To stand after falling is to see differently. The eyes you carry are not the same as before. Where once you looked with certainty, now you look with humility. Where once you saw only surface, now you perceive hidden layers. Pain has refined your vision, sharpening your ability to notice beauty in small things, to sense truth where others see only noise. This vision is the gift of depth, a reward carved through hardship. The depth of standing is also the depth of gratitude. When you have lain in dust, air itself feels like treasure. When you have tasted despair, even a small joy feels like feast. The sunrise you once ignored now burns brighter. The laughter you once overlooked now carries you further. The silence you once feared now comforts you. To stand again is to awaken to life's simple abundance, to receive the ordinary as miracle. Depth reshapes your relationship with strength. Before, strength meant control, appearance, endurance without fracture. But now you know strength is something else. The ability to break and mend, to fall and rise, to carry scars without shame. Standing again teaches you that true strength is not invulnerability but resilience. It is not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain dictate the story. And this depth also reveals a paradox. In standing again, you become both softer and stronger. Softer because compassion flows from wounds healed. You understand the trembling of others. You recognize the silence of despair. You no longer judge as quickly. And stronger because you have endured the breaking and survived the mending. You know now that falling is not final and that knowledge cannot be taken from you. Softer and stronger, this is the depth of standing. Consider the ocean. Its surface reflects storms, winds, waves, but beneath, in its depths, it holds stillness, power, and mystery. To live only on the surface is to be tossed endlessly, but to live in depth is to find steadiness, even as storms rage above. When you stand again, you no longer remain at the surface of living. You sink into depth, into a strength unshaken by every storm. The depth of standing also shifts your understanding of identity. You are not merely the one who fell and rose. You are the one remade in the process. This remaking is not cosmetic. It is foundational. You do not return to who you were before collapse, because that version could not have survived what you endured. You become someone new, fuller, richer, braver. The fall did not erase you. It expanded you. The rise did not return you. It transformed you. And as you live in this depth, you realize standing again was never about proving worth to others. It was about uncovering the worth you already held, the applause of the world, the approval of voices, the validation of eyes they are fleeting. But the courage within, the resilience born of scars, the wisdom carried in silence, these are eternal. Depth means knowing you no longer rise for them, you rise for truth. Standing again at this depth is freedom. Freedom from illusions, freedom from false names, freedom from the fear of falling. For once you have fallen and risen, fear loses its sharpness. You know pain is survivable. You know despair is not endless. You know collapse is not conclusion. And that knowledge frees you from chains that once bound you tightly. The depth of standing cannot be measured by outward eyes. Others may see only that you are upright again. They may not understand the journey carved inside you, the valleys crossed, the mountains climbed. But you feel the gravity of what it means to breathe after silence, to walk after stillness, to smile after sorrow. And this knowing shapes the way you live, the way you speak, the way you touch others' lives. This depth also brings responsibility. Once you know the power of rising, you cannot dismiss the fallen around you. You cannot ignore the trembling hands, the silent cries, the eyes that mirror your past despair. The depth of standing calls you to compassion, to gentleness, to presence, not because you must fix others, but because your very being reminds them that they too can stand. And so, the courage to stand again becomes more than survival, more than inspiration. It becomes transformation. It is the creation of a new self, a new way of being, a new relationship with life. It is the discovery that the fall was not the end, but the doorway into depth. And through that doorway, you now walk, carrying scars as wisdom, carrying silence as strength, carrying gratitude as breath. From here, the story bends toward its final revelation. Standing again is not only about movement, not only about survival, not even only about inspiration. It is about claiming the full depth of life, broken, mended, scarred, renewed. And in that depth, the courage you carry shines brighter than ever, preparing you for the final act of this journey. The closing note where everything converges into truth. For the courage to stand again is not simply about surviving the fall. It is about becoming someone who no longer fears it. The final truth is not that you rose once. It is that you discovered the strength to rise always. This is the climax, the moment where scars no longer ache as reminders of loss, but glow as symbols of endurance. Standing again does not erase the memory of collapse. The ground still remembers. Your body still recalls the ache. Your heart still carries echoes of silence. But closure is not about erasure. It is about integration. It is about weaving every wound, every scar, every moment of despair into the fabric of who you are, and realizing that the fabric is not torn, it is stronger. You are not less because of what happened. You are more. The emotional climax of standing again is the realization that worth was never lost in the fall. It was only hidden beneath the dust. You see now that no collapse, no silence, no betrayal could strip away the essence of who you are. The fall revealed it. The scars revealed it. The rising revealed it. And now you stand, not begging for approval, not chasing validation, but grounded in the truth that your being itself is enough. This closure is not given by others. It does not arrive in apologies you may never receive, in recognition you may never gain, in reconciliation that may never come. Closure arrives when you decide that the absence of these things no longer determines your value. Closure is the courage to say, I am whole, even without what left. I am worthy, even without what returned. I am enough, even without what was taken. And in this knowing, the ache itself transforms. The ache that once haunted you becomes proof of love, proof of risk, proof of courage. H means you dared to open yourself, you dared to hope, you dared to try, and though it hurt, you survived. The scar left behind is not weakness, it is a signature of strength. It testifies, I lived, I endured, I rose. This is the emotional climax when you look at your scars, not with shame, but with reverence. When you gather the fragments of your story and see them not as evidence of failure, but as mosaic of resilience. When you realize that those who could not see you, those who left when you were no longer useful, those who turned away in your silence, they were never your foundation. They were passing weather, storms that rattled branches but never reached the roots. And the roots, deep and enduring, remind you of what has always been true. You were never defined by their gaze. You were always defined by your own becoming. Closure also means release. Release of the weight that said you must be useful to be loved. Release of the voices that said you must never fall. Release of the silence that told you you were forgotten. You let them go, not because they were never real, but because they no longer own you. Their absence is not your emptiness. Their silence is not your ending. Their blindness is not your burden. And so you stand, breathing steady, body trembling but alive, spirit luminous. You are no longer clinging to what left. You are embracing what remains. You are no longer pleading for a place in someone else's world. You are claiming your own. You are no longer waiting for permission to rise. You are rising because you were always meant to. This is the closure, not in their return, but in your release. The courage to stand again becomes not just survival, not just inspiration, but transformation. You are no longer the same as before. You are stronger, softer, deeper, freer. You are scarred, yes, but those scars shine brighter than untouched skin. You are broken and remade, but the remaking is your beauty. You are not untouched by pain, but you are untouchable by despair. And now, as you lift your face to the horizon, you understand. The fall did not end you. It revealed you. The silence did not erase you. It refined you. The scars did not diminish you. They crowned you. Standing again was never about going back to what was. It was always about stepping into what could be a self unshaken, a self awakened, a self alive in truth. So let the past be the soil. Let the scars be the map. Let the courage be the flame. Walk forward with dignity unshakable, carrying the story of your fall not as shame but as song. For you are proof that collapse is not conclusion. You are proof that silence is not death. You are proof that courage does not end. And in this proof lies the final truth. You will fall again in life. But now you know every fall carries within it the seed of rising. And because you carry that seed, you are unbreakable. The courage to stand again is not an event. It is who you have become. This is the closure, the emotional climax, the final note. You are not finished, and you never will be. You will rise again and again, and each rise will write a brighter chapter than the last.